Hello, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 16th episode of Employee Engagement Live. I'm Shrikant Acharya, CEO at offineeds.com, a leading corporate gifting and merchandise company. And this has been a very, very exciting journey. In the last 15 episodes, if you've been with me, you've heard a lot of different speakers talk about the different angles, different points of view, different ideas and philosophies about employee engagement. Before I introduce our speaker for the day, I want to talk to you a little bit about why we do employee engagement. Now, employee engagement has been a very, very important topic in the last 5 to 10 years, even before that, but in the last 5 to 10 years, it's become of utmost importance. Talent acquisition, talent retention has been a big challenge for pretty much all companies across sectors, across the board, and across cities. But in the last 1.5 to 2 years, it's become even more difficult and even more challenging thanks to the remote working environment that we are in. Also, thanks to the pandemic and because of all of the situation that we are in, employee engagement has become so much more challenging. And that's why I decided to do these interviews where I invite seasoned professionals from HR, corporate communications, and leadership teams of different organizations and ask them about their ideas, about their philosophies, about anecdotes and experiences with respect to employee engagement. So, with that, let me invite today's guest and today's speaker. So, I've known Nancy almost, I think, for 12 or 15 years now. She was one of my early clients when she was working with ING Bank and ING Life Insurance. And what I can remember about her is that she's always charming, always smiling, and always enthusiastic. So Nancy, right now, leads the people communication and employee engagement at Accenture India. She's a marketing and communication professional with 18 years of experience managing and working in global brands spanning in the IT and BFSI sectors, including Citibank, ING, and HP. Moving from mainstream and traditional marketing to a specialized area of people communications, she believes has been a great evolution as India is the growing talent hub for the world. And as she told me, make your people your best storytellers. Today, we will find out a little bit more about that. Nancy volunteers at the Board of Rehabilitation of Women with Disabilities, an NGO based in Bangalore. And she's also a seeker of experiences, a travel enthusiast, a dog lover, and an aspiring eco champion. We have many sides to Nancy, and today's conversation is going to be super fun as we get a lot more points of views about employee engagement from her. So with that, Nancy, welcome to Employee Engagement Live. How are you doing today?
Thank you, Shrikant, and thank you for having me over here. It's interesting. I'm the 16th speaker, so I'm presuming your series is doing very well. So thanks for having me over.
Awesome. So let me
I don't know whether we lost you, Shrikant.
Nancy, I'm sorry,
I
I'm
think
not sure
I lost
if
you
I
in
if I
between.
Yeah. So let me ask you that question once again. What, according to you, Nancy, is employee engagement?
Okay, you're getting straight to the point. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying not to give a textbookish answer, but I believe it's when the employee is completely synergized and with the ethos of a company and the brand. I mean, head, heart, and in intention and action, or the hands, as they say, completely synergized with the brand. And if they are a walking, talking billboard of the brand, I think the actions you take to get there is what we call employee engagement. Yeah.
Awesome. Fantastic answer. Not at all textbookish. I completely resonate with what you're saying. And in the next 40 minutes, let's try and speak. How do you get there? How do you really make that happen? And I know when we've spoken, you mentioned about the role of storytelling, using stories and using employee stories to be able to kind of get there, right? So tell us a little bit about the role of stories in employee engagement.
I think ever since we've understood words and language. I think things have passed on as stories. And if a brand has to build itself, especially in a with talent being at the center of what it stands for, I think the best way we as human beings understand and connect is by telling stories to one another. So I believe you keep that as the crux of engagement. I think that testimonials, people standing up and telling their authentic story in their voice, um, is what I think a brand today should aspire doing at scale and in with a lot of depth. So I see a lot of people who've joined from various companies and industries, ranging from startups to a lot of IT companies I see, and a lot of FMCG brands I'm noticing. It's interesting that um, it cuts across. It doesn't matter which industry you're engaging an employee in. I think the art of storytelling is something that a brand should indulge in and invest in. And also, I think it's the language and the tone in which you tell the story. It's no longer the employee bearing the brand voice, but the
Mm,
brand endorsing the employee voice. And I think that's where the roles have changed. Um,
mm,
so it's a lot of weekend language, a lot of kitchen language, as we call it these days, easy hearing, um, telling it as it is. So it's very come as you are content. And I think storytelling in that form will resonate well. And there's also this whole statistics I keep throwing. Which is just like any other consumer brand. I think 80% of what an employee tells as what the ethos of a brand is what's believed outside, versus a brand
mm.
tom-tomming about their media headline or putting it out of the social media. So with that kind of a backing of credibility from an employee, I think investing in good storytelling is key.
Awesome. I think that's very very well explained, and it may seem very obvious, right? We love stories from the time we are young, and we've been reading storybooks from
Absolutely.
from from a
Yeah.
long time, and it doesn't matter how old or how young you are, you always like to listen
Yeah.
to a good story. But only in the last few years, or maybe the last 5 6 years, you hear about corporates and organizations embracing storytelling. So we'll talk a little bit
I'd
more
like to
about that.
add to that. I'd like to add to that,
Yeah,
Shrikant,
go ahead,
purely
Nancy.
because it's just about losing control as a brand, the
Hmm.
ability to lose control, to let the employee hold the narrative. I think that
Right.
is what's happened over the past few years, that evolution in storytelling. So
Right,
that's the
right,
thing.
right.
Yeah.
Absolutely, becoming comfortable with losing control on your brand narrative. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And as we before we proceed, I want to thank all the audience and welcome all the audience. Thank you so much. It's a Friday afternoon, almost winding up your working the last working day of the week. Thank you so much for taking time off and coming in. And I can assure you that this conversation with Nancy is going to be super interesting if you're in corporate communications or if you're in charge of employee engagement at your own organization. So if you know Nancy or if you know me and you want to kind of say hello to us, please do drop in a message on the comment box, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, or wherever you're joining from right now. And towards the end of this conversation, I'll kind of open it up and encourage you to put in any questions that you might have, and I'll pose it to Nancy. With that said, let's talk a little bit about losing control on the narrative or on the story. Have you seen something go wrong with storytelling? Have you seen anything? And what is the most extreme that you've seen, which is either great, somebody told a story about an organization that was like, wow, we did not see that coming, or somewhere where something went really, really wrong. Does anything come to your mind?
You know, no, I'm not getting a thing that went wrong, but typically what happens after fab storytelling is
Hmm.
that employee is probably the most sought after by every recruitment firm. So it's the dichotomy of if you want to say it's a story that gone bad for the organization, yes, in that way, but it
Right.
definitely sets the brand up well. I've fortunately never had a mishap like that till date, thankfully.
Hmm.
Never heard of one.
Right. Right. Yeah, yeah, I can kind of understand what you're saying. I've seen in on the New York Times Square, companies posting employees pictures of their best employees and so on, right? So they're
Yeah,
obviously
yeah. And
stars
soon they're off
that are
from
really
there.
sought after.
Yeah,
They're soon
yeah.
very soon off from there, right? So
Though
let's
though
talk a little bit.
employees, though the thing is that with people is that they don't naturally tell their story well. So, for any communication person who's tuned in, I'm sure you agree with me. There's a lot of hand holding and briefing that goes on. But the important thing is to not step over to tell the employee what they need to say, but it's to just instill that
Mm,
confidence on how they can say it. And I get the art of storytelling is where you pass on that experience, but you don't tell the other person's story. And that's the communication balance that you'll end up striking.
right. Can you give us an example of one such narrative that you helped somebody build, or you seen it happen with somebody?
I guess it happens a lot with people when they are in their very technical careers. So they've all jumped
Mm,
careers, they've grown in skill, they've risen up the ranks. But when they tell their story, they break it down to things that other people don't understand. So the idea is to
mm,
be able to demystify smaller nuances that you take for granted. So abbreviations, for example, right? People are just going to be rattling off, I've done the certification, this. But for the person on the other side who's listening to you,
yeah.
it's not from your industry. They do know you're credible. They do know you're capable, but they don't get
Mm,
the nuance of what you actually did for the client. So
mm,
outcome-based storytelling,
yeah.
experience-based storytelling, I think
Mm,
becomes critical. I don't have like sharp examples to share right now, but I've noticed this over a period
right.
of time that especially working with technically sound people to to break
Right.
down their story into that one headline or quotable quote is a task,
Right.
but it's a task worth working on. And I think individually, if all
Yeah.
of us can sharpen that skill of telling that story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think that's great advice. All of us should sharpen our storytelling skills, because I cannot tell you the number of times I've hired somebody who said, "Sir, let's just put this resume aside and let me tell you what I did in my previous organization." I'm like, hired, right? So storytelling is undoubtedly an extremely useful tool, whether you're trying to get a promotion or whether you're trying to acquire a new
Yeah,
client or find a new job.
absolutely.
Right, Nancy. So 10th of October, 2 days from now, is mental well-being month, right? Well-being day of the year, right? So tell us a little bit about mental well-being, and there's a lot that's being spoken about it right now more openly than before, and and I think I understand that it's become even more challenging in a work from home kind of a situation. You're not seeing the person face to face. You don't really know what's going on. So tell me about the challenges with employee mental well-being management in large organizations.
Yeah, so it's World Mental Health Day coming up, Sunday, 8th October. Yeah, it's Sunday, 8th October. 10th October. I'm losing
10th
track of time.
October. Yeah.
10th October. I think the reason why well-being or mental health is such a key aspect to employee engagement these days is it's no longer about engagement being measured in or rather influenced through payroll and bonus and workflow management and safety standards. It's not just that anymore. I think the whole sociological and psychological angle to how an employee needs to be engaged with is now no longer
Mm,
a corridor conversation but a boardroom conversation. And I think
mm,
that is why something like mental health takes center stage, and especially with the whole COVID thing, we've all been through our own fair share of ups and downs. um,
yes.
and to the point where for employee engagement equates to sense of belonging, and it is important that you are understood and accepted for who you are completely. And
Mm,
that's where the whole mental well-being comes in or as an agenda for someone to engage an employee with. Because today people don't just come there saying, I have Python skills, I have niche skills, I have consulting skills, but they come there saying, accept me for who I am, and I bring these skills to the table. So that accept me for who I
mm,
am is that variable of the employee engagement, where I think today mental health, any form of acceptance where there's a stigma attached to it, be it even with inclusion and diversity in the way we see it, are all key areas of elements of employee engagement. So I'm glad you touched upon that topic, considering it's topical with the day coming up. So yeah, the variables
Right.
of employee engagement have shifted over the years. It's no longer something measurable, but it's very intangible in the way we're seeing it these days.
Right. Right.
And there are
Right.
studies and theories to prove it, where
Hmm.
productivity is higher, retention is higher in organizations that talk this language. So I
Hmm.
think it builds that halo with the employee, with the brand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Perfect. Really well said. And since we are on that, tell me what, according to you, are some of the most effective employee engagement initiatives that you've seen being taken in your current organization or past organization or in any other organization. You spoke about the importance of mental well-being, right? But what else have you taken? You've been moved by it, and you said, "Wow, this was awesome."
Okay, let me cluster it up a bit.
Perfect.
I think any engagement that is driven with a sense of purpose, that fuels a sense of purpose, I would say. Be it, let me say something I do for myself, which is my purpose of being in an organization, which is to innovate or create value. Now, a campaign in that space, which fuels that sense of purpose for me, would work. Or it could be a sense of purpose from an external community perspective. So something I'm doing for a corporate citizenship endeavor or a sustainability endeavor. And if an organization can work with me to fuel that purpose, then that's a winning campaign. That's a tick 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 in terms of you tick the organization's brand purpose, you tick the employee's sense of being and purpose. So I think anything to do with a purpose driven campaign has always been a success. So there are campaigns that I've been a part of which have gotten people to sign up for causes, sign up for submitting ideas that have, created, which have launched patents in various spaces. So just
Okay.
innovation and sense of purpose and other things, I think just drives a good campaign. Uh, I think in India and any it's just normal human behavior. Also, I believe there's if there is a clear what's in it for me, then I think a lot of junior career levels will sign up for things. For example, bragging rights, and we spoke about it. A billboard in the New York Times. You know, if I have a bragging right to be the face of the company I'm a part of, then that's a successful campaign if you're going to be driving participation towards that. Or if there's an
Right.
experience that you can win or be recognized for, I think that what's in it for me, the bragging rights, that creates a good campaign. And thirdly, I would say anything which has a 360-degree channel mix. So if your organization has an internal social media platform, you have
Right.
in-person stand-up huddles. If you have a good, let's say, customizable portal page or a portal, and then you have a mix of other collaboration tools, and you bring all of them together, I think they all land up being good, successful campaigns. While I can share details on, but they're all very internal to the brands I've worked with. So I'm not sure how much of an appeal it has externally, but which is why I think clustering this hopefully helps. I'm hoping it did.
Yeah. Yeah, it did. It did. But let me ask a question that's kind of aligned to that, right? Now, you spoke about aligning personal mission with the organization's mission, something along those lines. Right? But how do you do that at scale? If you're a small organization, a small team, 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 people, I can understand. When there are thousands of people, how do you really achieve that at scale?
I think it is a tough one, and that's a challenge. And it is something we all in communications grapple with. A lot of HR professionals grapple with that, especially given the fact that um, even within a career level, within a function, within certain skill sets, within locations, within channels, you will have different people. And each one of them aligned to the brand differently. So the challenge is there, it will continue to exist. The larger you are, the bigger the challenge. But the thing with where I always suggest, and I'm sure all of you on the call as well will resonate, is when you work with data to cut that slice across all of this, I think you can clearly see personas emerge. And some of us do it intuitively. In a smaller organization, some of us will do it intuitively to say a new joiner in this particular channel in this location will resonate with the brand differently because of their
Yeah.
vintage, where they come from and their past. Whereas in a larger organization, you may need to rely on data, metrics that are throwing up behaviors of how many events an employee attended, how quickly do they open a particular memo to read, how often do they contribute content to a social media platform. All of these metrics eventually have to be studied to see in what way,
Right.
and in engagement, content being king, what way will you tweak that content to appeal to whom? So it's a lot of hyper personalization of content that I think will build that self purpose and company purpose to resonate, because the company purpose at the end of it is a lot larger than the individual. So the idea is to make that individual fit in, and a lot of hyper
Yeah.
personalized content, I guess, gets you there.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of get a tone of what you're saying. We are in a multi-generational and multilingual, multicultural kind of a workforce that is there right now. We're talking
Yeah.
about inclusivity and diversity, and there's all kinds of people, right? You cannot just put everything in a slot, and you cannot. So how do you do hyper personalization? Can you give me one or two examples?
Okay, so if I'm going to be talking, I think a very simple example.
Yeah.
Large organizations, there's a war for talent. Let's say we need to do an employee referral program, and I'm talking brass tacks here. I'm not talking any fancy campaign which has got a a brand aura to it. Let's say we're doing employee referral as a campaign,
Yeah.
and I'm expecting to hire people who have, let's say, 15 years of experience in the industry. The way I would curate that message to execs, right, needs to be thought through very differently to when I'm hiring a particular skill. Okay, so the way the memo, the subject line, the appeal, the call to action, the way you would customize content for just two different groups
Right.
when your end outcome is different, very, very critical. Just give you a very brass tacks example. But if you're going to if you're going to give me a little more time to think, I will. But I know we're on top of a good 8 minutes to close the session with questions. But if a good hyper personalized one would typically be persona led,
Yeah.
at an interest level. So if I am announcing a leadership development program, right, the way I would appeal to the women who are part of it is one slice, not to be gender, just not to talk gender alone, but that's one slice. The way I would appeal to vintage is another slice. So it really depends on the demographic and the interest of the person that you're talking to. That for me would be the first filter into hyper personalization. And then there's a
Okay.
lot of remarketing of how they consumed previous content, what their
Right.
reaction was. But I'd leave all of that aside just to say the brass tacks of segmenting, targeting, and positioning would be the first
Right.
go-to when you hyper personalize. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. So I have a few more questions that I've lined up. In the meanwhile, I want to invite anybody from the audience. If you have any questions that you want to ask Nancy, please go ahead and type it on the comments box, and I'll try to get Nancy to answer some of those questions. So Nancy, while we are at that point, the last 18 months have been extremely unpredictable, extremely chaotic, and very challenging in a lot of different ways, right? So how has employee engagement been different in these crisis situations?
Wow. It's quite intense. The past 18 months for any person who's worked in communications dealing with employees and clients, I would say,
Yeah.
have earned themselves a bunch of gray hair and dark circles. I can tell you that much for sure. But it's been worth it. And I'd say that because there are studies to show that during a crisis, an employee turns to the organization for credible information. Because there's so
Right.
much clutter around. You read stuff in the media, you read stuff on social media, there's a lot of hearsay, but the employee turns to their organization because they know that their organization is going to give them something that has been proofed and vetted by the sources that they rely on. So
Right.
it's a
Right.
responsibility that any communication professional during that time had to take very seriously. And that was a 24/7 requirement. I'm sure most people on the call who work in communications will agree with me. So crisis comms, at that, what we witnessed has obviously, it shook us up, but it also told us how important employee engagement and communication is to any organization.
Right. 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 So I'm sure there have been multiple challenges, but one among them is being, how do you stay motivated? How do you stay inspired to continue to do work, to continue to come back? So my question to you is, one, how do you do that? What's your biggest source of motivation? And what do you do to keep your immediate team motivated? And what do you do in general as a corporate communications professional?
I think I also misheard your previous question. Maybe it could be what were the challenges that an organization was facing as well, but we could get to that. Um, Personally, for me, I think it was a challenge because I'm a person who just derives energy from in-person conversations, and I was suddenly cut off from all of that. So it taught me a side of me that I realized I could collaborate, and in fact, today I think I'm better off virtually because I get a lot more stuff done. I don't need to beat Bangalore traffic to get going with that. And there's a lot more intentional listening when it's virtual, because you realize you're going to miss out something, so you're actually invested in that time. So it's worked for me. With my team, it's fantastic. We all catch up often. The idea is to show up. The idea is to
Right.
sync with your intent, share what drives you. So when working virtually, I think a couple of those things, we need to be open about saying it. We need
Right.
to land up. So landing up a few minutes before a call starts, I think, is a great practice I'd leave most people with. And I do that. Many people in the team do that because it just helps you connect.
Right.
So, yeah. But I want to talk about this challenge that we faced when we went remote. I think it's evolved because it's 18 months. It evolved from just moving from in person and analog, if I could say, to digitizing most things we were doing. But I think that problem has sailed. I think the problem now is more on how, under the same roof, if a couple's working, they're from two different organizations, um, but both of them are experiencing the same thing. There's nothing
Right.
differentiated. So how do you
Right.
create? How do you engage an employee in an environment you can't control? The only thing you're going to control is the 17-inch in front of you, right? So that's a big challenge. Um, like the whole work from home. I read this, so I have to quote it, but it said, "Can I get them to watch from home?" So for any one of us who are putting out content to engage an employee, how do you get them to watch from home without being
Right.
distracted? So a lot of challenges. I could continue listing them, but the challenges are evolving,
Yeah.
and I think that's the interesting part. Yeah.
Yeah. So how have those challenges been addressed? Because these are real novel challenges, right? What are the most innovative ways that you've seen that these challenges were addressed?
Yeah, I think we've got a fantastic vendor ecosystem and the whole Indian jugaad mentality of quickly moving to virtualizing events, and they've done a fantastic job. We've got within, I'm sure most organizations have their in-house tech teams working on it, and the whole vendor ecosystem. So, a lot of connections, things that allow for parallel connects to happen virtually. I think that technology is critical for most of us to
Right.
embrace. There are a lot of platforms, either open platforms, pay-per-use platforms, vendors bringing those platforms to you. I think
Yeah.
important for most brands to use that. Listening, I think, because everyone's scattered, using as much technology to listen, not in a creepy way, but to engage in dialogue, create interactivity. Then you be able to study behavior. How many people click on the right side pop up versus the left? How many people respond to a communication with a particular subject line?
Right.
How many people respond in the first place without any incentive? The idea is to keep listening to social chatter, and
Right.
then be able to feed that into employee programs. So technology to feed that, to create that listening platform is important.
Right.
Yeah, I'd leave at
Right.
this point. I'd say use technology as much as you can, because everything else
Yeah.
won't evolve and is not as agile, as I said, because challenges are evolving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me ask you, Nancy, are you looking forward to coming back to office?
You can't negate the importance of building, social capital. You can't
Right.
negate that. It's got its own power. um,
Mm.
that, accompanied with traffic and not having to get that 1 hour of extra time to yourself, to in the morning and in the evening. I think I would love,
Mm.
as they say these days, a hybrid way of working. I'm looking forward to
Right.
that. I'm looking forward to as having the best of both worlds. Yeah,
Right.
so I'm
Awesome.
truly
So we
looking
have a
forward.
question. Yeah, we have a question from Bincy here, who's asking, what should employee engagement strategies be to adapt post lockdown? Now, lockdown, everything is over, and we're slowly talking about coming back, right? So, what do you think is going to change in the way
Yeah,
any
yeah.
employee engagement strategies are going to be implemented?
Yeah. I think it's a good thing, because the working remotely happened organically. It was by default. We didn't have a choice. But
Yeah.
returning to working in office is going the undoing of it is very critical, because many of us have built comfort zones. So the idea is
Mm.
to not shake the system. In the
Mm.
first part, we all were uprooted from where we are and pushed into our homes to work. But on the other hand,
Right.
there is a myth that everybody wants to work from home, which is not true. People do
Mm.
want to come to
Mm.
office, okay? And like in my
Mm.
case, I do want to come to office when I want. So
Mm.
your strategies around that now get more complicated, because you will have two different workforces at any point to engage.
Yeah.
So
Mm.
again, as I go back to, I think using technology to
Mm.
manage two different workforces. And a little more philosophical thing is, neither of the workforces should feel like they're missing out on an experience.
Yeah.
And I think if
Yeah.
you just keep these two in mind, just to begin, when you plan a campaign, I think could
Mm.
be a starting point. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the next set of challenges that corporate communication guys are going to face. How do you communicate to these two different uh,
Yeah,
groups without making one left out or left behind?
absolutely. It's a challenge, but a good problem to have.
So,
So,
good problem to have right now. I think we've gotten used to handling challenges so dynamically that, like, bring it on. Let's see what else.
yeah.
Okay, so you had 18 years of work experience. You worked with different kinds of organizations. What, according to you, has changed in the way in terms of employee expectations out of a job? Because I remember when I took up my first job back in 2004, I didn't have much clarity. It's like I got recruited at campus and I just took it up. But now I see, the current workforce it interviews the organization as much as the organization interviews him or her, right? So in your view, what has changed in terms of employee expectations from a job?
Okay, so this is not a comms question, so I'm just going to answer it as a working professional. Um,
Yeah.
and you rightly put it. I think the control has moved from the employer to the employee. I think the more
Mm.
gig we're going to get, the more an employee is going to dictate what they want and for how long they want that benefit. Um,
Right.
I also think that because it's going to be a multi-generational workforce, the same
Mm.
motivators don't apply. So if you're going to have a
Yeah.
boomer and a Gen Z working in
Mm.
the same project,
Mm.
you need to really figure out as a supervisor how you're going to motivate this wide
Mm.
spectrum of people. And it is a challenge, because the supervisor is not going to be someone in the middle, but someone probably at a Gen X, I believe. So
Right.
this gap, and you have the alphas already coming in. So I think the motivators, if you study them better, um,
Mm.
and more real time, I think
Mm.
it's going to help us. But I clearly see that
Right.
the control has moved from the employer. It's a talent market.
Right.
So
It is
maybe
a
we should
talent
start
market.
our careers. We should start our careers now, Shrikant. Maybe we could have negotiated better. So
Right. I heard you use the word war for talent, and in the last 1 or 2 years, I've been hearing that multiple times. the war for talent is real, right? So as an organization, what do you do to be able to, sort of say, win this war? Or let me put it another way, right? So the large organizations, the well-funded organizations, have the might to have an advantage over startups and the smaller organizations. So any advice for smaller organizations, what they can do to be able to acquire better talent?
No, I actually beg to differ, Shrikant. I don't think large organizations have an advantage as compared to smaller organizations. They may have an advantage of being able to advertise more or being able to draw talent.
Mm,
Okay.
right.
But I think today, if you're able to put out your proposition uh,
Mm,
appealing to the purpose of what an employee would achieve once they come on board. I'm just leaving aside
mm,
everything else, which is the money, the
mm,
flexibility, all of that. But if you put
right.
out your ability to connect to the employee's purpose a
Mm,
lot in a sharper manner, I think you'll at least
right.
draw the CVs, which
Mm,
many organizations are already doing. They're talking about
mm,
outcomes. They're talking
mm,
about what one would do versus what one will get.
mm,
What how they would change, let's say, in a very utopic sense, the world versus how they'd probably jump 2 levels in 10 years or 5 years. Sorry, I should say
mm,
lesser time.
mm,
So I
mm,
think they've changed. That narrative change needs to stay, and I think more purpose
mm,
driven attracting of talent would help from a messaging standpoint is what I'm
right.
trying to say. There are a lot more HR practices that I think would help
Yeah,
get there. But differentiating yourself in this crazy market, I think, lies in that,
makes
alongside
sense.
many other factors that build the talent brand.
Right. Right. Awesome. There's a question here from Gautam who's asking on YouTube about three words that you would use to describe employee engagement culture. But let's talk a little bit about culture in general, right? So, what, according to you, and especially now that the narrative is in the hands of the individual, and the organization or the corpcom is less in control. How do you? What are the challenges with building a culture, and can you really build a culture, or just have to so where are you around this culture question, work culture question?
That's a tough one. It's for generations to solve. Um, but if I were to just imagine myself working in a very young brand, um,
Yeah.
and I've had the opportunity of working with brands that have been new in India who are trying to establish. And how would you bring your culture from somewhere else here? If I were to just extrapolate on something like that, I think it's a lot to
Mm,
do with an authentic leadership voice
mm,
who walks the talk. I
mm,
think there are certain things you won't compromise on, certain
mm,
values,
mm,
and then I would just probably put it as bold commitments you put out on that,
mm,
so that whoever
right.
you're attracting signs up for those bold commitments. They
Mm,
see the values at play, and
mm,
they see a leadership that is endorsing it or advocating it. And I'm just saying probably a very small part of what culture is all about.
yeah.
But it's a huge investment, and it's not
Mm,
something I could just spin up in a couple of seconds to share. But it's a topic that we can talk in length. But I think
right.
there's, as I said, leadership, bold commitments, and values that you stick to no matter what, and your brand stands
Right.
for that. Your identity is linked to it.
Mm, right. Perfect. So you spoke about leadership, right? So tell me a little bit more about what are the ideal kind of leadership. So we've heard multiple times that people quit organizations because of their managers. They stick, and they quit organizations because of great managers. They follow great managers, right? So tell me, what according to you is great leadership in the context of uh, motivating their team and employee engagement and helping improve productivity.
I had a strange expression because I don't think anyone's totally cracked it in the sense
Uh,
at scale. Okay, at scale.
yeah.
But if you were to look at great leaders, and I've had the privilege of working with some great people, I have a great team I work with. who I learned
Right.
from. So okay, I think the bar just went out here. Okay, so my take is the ability to walk alongside versus
Mm.
lead. I'd probably leave it at that. And I think therein also lies a culture. So you will see some
Yeah.
industries, some organizations where you you see leaders leading from the front, um,
Mm.
aggressively, because that's what is needed in
Mm.
a sales driven organization. You cannot mollycoddle people
Mm.
all the time, but there are leadership
Mm.
styles where you can balance that by walking alongside. I've seen
Mm.
people do the latter, and I've had the privilege of working with them, and I believe that's a style that sticks as well.
Right.
But it's a good combination of being aggressive where it matters because your industry or the role needs it, and
Right.
I think when you're a leader, you become more of a generalist.
Mm.
You 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 don't you don't stay as a specialist, and that's important,
Right.
because if you are a
Yeah.
specialist, then there's somebody already can do that job for you. The idea is a
Mm.
generalist, you pick on the strengths of everyone and you play to it, and I guess that's what makes
Awesome.
also a good leader.
Awesome.
Now
Love
we're getting
that
into
answer.
philosophical
Really love that
conversation,
answer.
so it's going outside my communication domain, but it's all philosophical conversation, so it's good to have.
So let's go back to the first answer which you spoke about. You spoke about storytelling, and you said how in an ideal world you'd like every employee to be a walking, talking brand ambassador for the organization, right? So what,
Yeah.
according to you, does it take to make every employee, or ideally every employee, become a strong brand ambassador for the organization?
A lot of things we spoke about, a lot of things. um,
Mm.
I think from a very logical standpoint, it's the
Mm.
perception and the reality gap.
Mm.
Okay, the smaller the gap, the better the chances of all your people being that ambassador for you. And I
Right.
think the constant thing that we notice with brands is over promising.
Mm.
Very rarely will you find somebody who undersells, and that's obviously the job of a complete marketing team that does that, which is great because sometimes you have to step up the brand. It has to be aspirational, but the idea is that the
Right.
gap between the perception and reality has to be small, sizable
Mm.
enough to palate for the employee, such a way that
Right.
they aspire to grow that culture to get to that
Right.
reality, to that
Right.
perception, sorry. Yeah, so smaller the gap, the higher the chances of you having an ambassador who'll stand up on their own and advocate for you. That's just
Mm.
my take.
Awesome, awesome. I love that. I completely resonate with that. Minimizing or bridging the gap between perception and reality. And I also like the way you said it, that it's important that the marketing, or the story should be a little more than it is, so that the rest of the organization catches up and
Yeah.
grows to deliver to that expectation, right? So awesome. It's been fantastic speaking to you, Nancy. Thank you so much for your time. I know you have a ton of things to do, and you have a really busy schedule. Really appreciate you taking this time off and being here. And I want to thank all the audience for taking the time off on a Friday evening and being a part of this conversation. I really hope we've delivered some value and answered some questions that you had in your mind. Any closing words, Nancy?
No, thank you. I know I stand between them and their Friday evening beer, so I'm not going to say it much. But it's been fantastic. Thank you for having me over. And I just think that more than just walking in the shoes of the employee, if you can, I always say this, if you can tiptoe in the shoes of the employee, understand every bit
Mm,
that matters to them, I think engagement will just follow. So with
yeah,
that
awesome.
added
Very,
value.
very well said. Awesome. Thank you. Thanks once again, Nancy, for taking the time off. Have a fantastic weekend, and wonderful weekend to everybody who's joined in here. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.